Word of the arrival of a new knight at King Arthur's court was spreading throughout Camelot. He was rumored to be young, strong, and valiant, and his swordsmanship was on par with that of the noblest warriors of the Round Table. His name was Lancelot, who had come from distant lands in pursuit of glory and adventure. Always eager to welcome new champions to his court, Arthur invited Lancelot to a forthcoming tournament. It was the ultimate chance for the young knight to prove his worth and earn a place among the kingdom's bravest. Lancelot enthusiastically accepted the challenge. On the tournament day, he arrived in shining armor and a feathered helmet, riding a steed. His eyes glowed with the flame of youth and ambition. The tournament began, and Lancelot charged into battle with lion-like courage. He swept his opponents off their horses with accurate and powerful blows from his lance, showing uncommon dexterity and strength. Experienced and renowned knights tumbled before his dexterity, and the people were astonished by the skills of this young warrior. Lancelot's reputation grew with each victory. The people acclaimed him from the stands, and the other knights looked on with admiration and respect. Sitting on his throne, Arthur was smiling with satisfaction. He had found a new champion for his court, a warrior fit to sit at the Round Table. Queen Guinevere was also enamored of the young knight, beautiful, strong, and courteous. He looked like the model of the perfect knight. Lancelot dedicated his victory as a tribute to the queen's beauty, charm, and kindness. With every blow landed, every opponent defeated, every drop of sweat shed, everything was in her honor, and he swore he would always be willing to be her defender whenever necessary. As soon as Lancelot arrived at court, he found himself fascinated by Queen Guinevere's beauty and kindness. The admiration was mutual. In turn, the queen perceived in the knight not only strength and bravery, but also a rare nobility of spirit and gentleness. Casual meetings in the castle gardens, conversations at court festivities, glances exchanged during tournaments. A deep and unique friendship flourished between them, woven together by an undeniable attraction that they were both trying to contain. Mindful of their duties and the loyalty they owed to King Arthur, Lancelot and Guinevere struggled to keep that feeling under control, turning passion into admiration, desire into respect. But love grew stronger every day, threatening to break through the barriers of reason and caution. A chilly silence fell over the main hall of Camelot Castle. The merry bustle of the courtiers ceased altogether when a messenger, visibly worn out and covered in dust, entered the room, bringing with him ominous news. With a strained and burdened voice, he proclaimed the capture of Sir Ector and Sir Lionel, both taken prisoner by the cruel Sir Turquine. The news crashed like a thunderbolt through the court, and there was a whisper of astonishment and apprehension in the hall. Lancelot, standing next to the king, was overcome with grief when he heard the name of his brother and cousin. The memory of his friendship and fondness for them both prompted him to act. He approached King Arthur without hesitation, and with a resolute look on his face, asked for permission to ride off and rescue the captive knights. Knowing of Lancelot's bravery and loyalty, Arthur immediately granted him his request. Moved by a sense of urgency, Lancelot wasted no time. He headed to the royal stables, where he chose his fastest and strongest steed and fitted it with his shining armor and sharp sword. Within minutes, he was already riding through the citadel gates, on his way to rescue his relatives. Sir Turquine, the source of all this distress, was reveling in his latest conquest. He was the very opposite of everything a knight should represent. Driven by ruthlessness and a thirst for power, he scorned codes of honor and chivalry, taking delight in subduing and humiliating his opponents. His castle, nestled in an arid and inaccessible region, was more like a prison than a fortress. In his damp, dark cellars, Turquine held captive dozens of knights, most of them knights of Arthur, who had been defeated in battle and stripped of their freedom and dignity. Turquine's reasons were as obscure as his soul. Some said he acted out of pure evil, taking delight in wreaking havoc on people. Others claimed that he sought revenge against King Arthur and his knights, nurturing a deep hatred for the order and justice they represented. Some said that Turquine was fueled by excessive ambition, dreaming of one day destroying the Round Table and taking power for himself. After riding for days through inhospitable and deserted lands, Lancelot finally reached Sir Turquine's dominions. The road, ever darker and more sinister, led through dense forests and rugged valleys, where silence was broken only by crows cawing and the wind howling. As Lancelot came around a bend in the road, he spotted a group of horsemen escorting a young prisoner. Cautiously drawing closer, he spotted the coat of arms on the prisoner's shield. It was Sir Gaheris, one of the youngest knights of the Round Table, and Gawain's brother. Angered by the sight, Lancelot didn't hesitate to intervene. With a war cry echoing through the hills, he drew his sword and launched into the attack, stunning Gaheris' captors. With one agile movement, Lancelot struck down the first knight, dodged the attack, and, in a sharp counter, defused another opponent, who fell backwards, surprised by his opponent's strength. Yet another knight tried to attack Lancelot, but was met with a sword blow that sent him crashing to the ground. The metallic sound of armor colliding with stone echoed through the valley, blending with the pained cries of the fallen knights. His sword, gleaming in the afternoon sun, danced across the air, tracing a light trail with each blow he struck. Shields were shattered, helmets were battered, and armor was pierced by the relentless blade. The other knights, on seeing Lancelot's ferocity, faltered. Cowardice had already gripped their hearts and they fled. Sir Gaheris admired Lancelot and was in awe of the dexterity of the knight who had just freed him. Lancelot was not just a warrior in his eyes, but an avenging angel, sent to punish those who dared to challenge justice and honor. Anxious to help rescue his brother, and overwhelmed by Lancelot's courage, Gaheris offered to accompany him. But Lancelot, mindful of the dangers that awaited them, declined the offer. However, he proposed a plan. Gaheris would go back to Arthur's court and report the situation to the king, asking him to gather reinforcements and take them to Turquine's castle. In the meantime, Lancelot would infiltrate the fortress and try to release the prisoners. Although unwilling to leave Lancelot alone, Gaheris agreed. With a handshake and a grateful stare, Gaheris said goodbye to Lancelot and set off towards Camelot, while the noble knight headed for Turquine's castle, ready to face evil and rescue his fellow captives. Seeking to rescue his kidnapped relatives, Lancelot finally arrived at Sir Turquine's castle, perched on top of a precipitous cliff, like a predator prowling the desolate landscape. Its tall, imposing walls seemed to defy anybody who dared to draw near. Yet this sinister atmosphere in the air did not intimidate Lancelot. With unshakable resolve, he rode up to the castle gates and, raising his voice, challenged Sir Turquine to a duel. "Sir Turquine, step out of your lair and face me in single combat. You, so contemptuous of honor and justice, will now have the chance to prove your worth against a proper knight." The ensuing silence was broken only by the cawing of crows flying over the castle. The heavy wooden doors opened with a bang, and Sir Turquine strode out, mounted on a black steed and wearing armor as dark as night. With an expression of cruelty and arrogance, his face contorted into a grim smile upon seeing Lancelot. "Well, oh well, what do we have here? Yet another Camelot knight is coming to challenge me in my own castle. Such impudence! This is not about impudence, Sir Turquine, but about justice. You have taken noble knights captive, besmirching the honor of chivalry. I have come to free them and make you pay for your crimes." "Crimes!" Turquine taunted with a loud laugh. "Force is the only offense I recognize, and I'm stronger than any of you. I've already defeated dozens of Round Table knights, and you will be just one more. We shall see. Let the Lord decide who he thinks has the truth." Before long, both knights pitted their wits against each other, initiating a duel that would go down in the history of chivalry. Lancelot's rage collided with Turquine's brutality in an epic clash between light and darkness, honor and dishonor. The clashing sound of swords rang out like thunder, and sparks burst in the air as Lancelot and Turquine crossed blades. With raw, savage strength, Turquine charged forward with fierce blows, attempting to crush Lancelot with the sheer weight of his sword. But Lancelot remained steadfast and serene, deftly warding off the blows. Lancelot's dexterity and agility shone through with every movement. He moved with the agility of a leopard, dodging Turquine's strikes and looking for gaps in his opponent's defense. With a firm and experienced hand, his sword suddenly seemed to have a life of its own, delivering blows that were aimed at the weak points in Turquine's armor. The battle continued when Lancelot, making the most of a reckless moment by his opponent, managed to strike a powerful blow. His sword struck Turquine's helmet with a heavy impact, sending him reeling backwards. Turquine, now feeling trapped, tried one last desperate blow, but Lancelot anticipated it, dodging the sword and driving his blade into his enemy's chest. Turquine groaned in pain. With his sword pointed at him, Lancelot said, "Surrender yourself, Sir Turquine. Victory is mine." With his face twisted by pain and hatred, he spat blood on the ground, but still cursed, "I will never surrender to a round-table knight. I'd rather die than become Arthur's prisoner." With a heavy sigh, Lancelot readied himself to strike the final blow. However, before he could act, Turquine drew his dagger and thrust it into his own chest. Lancelot gazed at Turquine's body with a combination of sadness and relief. The battle had been fierce, but justice prevailed. He had redeemed the honor of the imprisoned knights and wiped out a major threat to Arthur's kingdom. Now all that remained was for him to free the captives and return to Camelot with his mission accomplished. With Turquine now dead, and with the help of Sir Gaheris, who had just returned with reinforcements from Arthur's court, Lancelot forced the fortress garrison to surrender and entered the castle. The blood trails of the tyrant's victims dotted the path towards the dungeons, where the captive knights awaited their fate in humidity and darkness. With every step Lancelot took, the sound of the chains and the moans of the prisoners rang off the walls, exacerbating the feeling of oppression and injustice. When he reached the dungeons, Lancelot was met with a regrettable scene. Dozens of knights, who had once been proud and courageous, were now chained and dejected, with hope almost gone from their eyes. Lancelot spotted Sir Lionel and Sir Ector among them, his family members, their armor corroded and their faces stained with fatigue. The two knights, upon hearing the familiar voice, raised their heads in disbelief. "Lancelot, is that really you?" "Yes, indeed. I've come to free you and restore your dignity." With Gaheris' help, Lancelot broke the chains and freed the captive knights. There was joy and relief in the dungeon, and the knights, released from Turquine's oppression, gratefully embraced Lancelot with admiration. The knights left Turquine's castle together, now empty and silent, like a monument to defeated tyranny. The return of Lancelot and the rescued knights to Camelot turned into a triumph. The freed knights were greeted as heroes. With an open smile, Arthur welcomed Lancelot with open arms and praised his courage and gallantry. The celebrations went on for days, and Lancelot's name was again echoed in songs and stories, celebrating his victory over tyranny and his loyalty to the ideals of chivalry. Throughout the days that Lancelot was away, the Queen lived in constant worry. With each piece of information about Sir Turquine's cruelty, her anguish increased, and the fear of losing the knight she held so dear consumed her inside. The nights were endless, and her sleep was plagued by nightmares in which Lancelot was beaten and imprisoned by the tyrant. Now, with Lancelot safely back in Camelot, Guinevere could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The tension that had been trapping her was gone, giving way to a profound sense of gratitude and relief. But the experience had made her see more clearly the intensity of her feelings for Lancelot. The fear of losing him had exposed the extent of her feelings. an emotion that transcended mere awe and respect, and which brought her into constant conflict between reason and passion. As Guinevere watched Lancelot from the balcony, partaking in the celebrations, she felt a blend of happiness and melancholy. The joy of having him back countered the awareness of the passion sweeping through her heart. She knew that her bounded duty was to Arthur, her king and husband to whom she had pledged her allegiance. But every day her heart seemed to be drawn to Lancelot, the knight who had won not only her admiration, but also her affection. In the euphoria of the celebrations, Guinevere withdrew into her thoughts, reflecting on the future and the challenges ahead of her. Fate had brought Lancelot into her path in a way they could never have imagined, and now it was up to her to cope with this feeling growing in her chest, like a flower born among stones, for at no time had she wished to open herself up to this love. The atmosphere in Camelot was joyous and ecstatic at Lancelot's triumphant homecoming, bringing with him the rescued knights. But amid this general elation, Lancelot carried with him a restlessness that he could not dissipate. His relationship with Guinevere, heightened by the emotions he had experienced during her absence, had reignited the passion he was trying to keep under control. The intimate stares, the whispered conversations, the accidental touches, every encounter with the Queen was a battle against seduction, a test of his loyalty to Arthur and the vows he had taken as a knight. Lancelot noticed that the fine line between admiration and love, respect and passion, was becoming increasingly tenuous, threatening to break at any moment. Haunted by this internal struggle, Lancelot found refuge in solitude. He would spend hours in the castle gardens, absorbed in deep reflection, or wandering through the nearby forests, trying to find peace in nature. But Guinevere's image pursued him wherever he went, and the memory of their meetings swept over him like a torrent, arousing contradictory feelings of joy and guilt. Conscious of the danger he represented to himself and the court, Lancelot made a difficult decision: to leave Camelot for a while and seek new adventures that would distance him from temptation and allow him to restore his lost poise. He knew that his relationship with Guinevere was a trap for both, a dangerous path that could lead them to ruin. With a heavy heart, but a resolute mind, Lancelot stood before Arthur and told him of his decision. "My king, I beg your permission to set out on a new mission. I feel the urge to serve the kingdom and prove my worth beyond the castle walls." Astonished by the sudden request, Arthur tried to convince Lancelot to remain in Camelot.
"Lancelot, you are one of my bravest and most loyal knights. Your presence here is precious and brings us boundless joy. Why would you want to leave?"
Without revealing his true motives, Lancelot replied in evasive fashion, "My king, my hunger for adventure and my desire to serve the kingdom impel me to explore new horizons. I believe I can be of use to your subjects by clearing your lands of ruffians." Although reluctant, Arthur granted Lancelot permission.
"If that is your will, Lancelot, I must not stop you. May good fortune be with you on your journey, and know that your absence will be felt in Camelot."
Lancelot left without saying goodbye to Guinevere. They both knew that distance would be a heavy burden to carry, but also a way of safeguarding the honor and loyalty that bound them to Arthur and the kingdom. Lancelot rode off on his steed and left Camelot, putting behind him his court, his friends, and the forbidden love that haunted him. He was looking for new adventures, but also for inner peace and redemption. The journey would be uncertain and long, but Lancelot knew it was the path he had to take to honor his vows and protect those he loved. Having ridden for weeks through distant kingdoms, Lancelot felt the weight of the journey on his shoulders. His once shining armor now bore the marks of dust and battle. His loyal steed, though strong and brave, was also wearing out. Resolved to give them both a well-deserved rest, Lancelot spotted a wood near a clear stream and ducked into the forest in search of shelter. Once he reached a sunny clearing, he dismounted and unbuckled the straps of his armor, allowing his body to relax and his mind to empty itself of the cares of court. He let his steed roam freely and laid down in the shade of a centuries-old oak tree, indulging in the silence and stillness of the place. As Lancelot rested, 4 queens entered the woods. They were Morgana le Fay, the mighty sorceress and half-sister of King Arthur, the Queen of North Gales, known for her exotic beauty and fiery temper, the Queen of Eastland, noted for her wisdom and wealth, and Sir Gawain's mother, a mature woman, but still towering and influential. When they saw Lancelot sleeping under the tree, the 4 queens were struck by the same emotion, infatuation. His masculine beauty, combined with the sense of strength and nobility that surrounded him, awakened an indescribable desire in them. Morgana swore to herself that she would hold him in her arms, no matter what the cost. The queens drew near in silence, watching him with curiosity and admiration. So the 4 queens, bound by a common desire, set about a plan to kidnap Lancelot and take him to their castle, where they would subject him to a variety of temptations and challenges, in the hope of winning his love and loyalty. With a subtle movement of her hands and an incantation whispered in an ancient tongue, Morgana cast a spell over Lancelot. A profound and irresistible sleep took hold of the knight, who sank into an unconscious stupor, oblivious to what was going on around him. Then, with the help of their servants, the 4 queens hauled Lancelot, still asleep, into a decked-out carriage and took him to a distant castle, concealed in a dense forest. Morgana's castle was a magical and mysterious place. Its walls were built of dark stone, and pointed towers rose into the sky, like threatening claws. Deep inside, labyrinthine corridors extended into lavish halls, furnished with exquisite tapestries and luxurious furniture. The castle had an atmosphere of witchcraft and magic permeating every corner, fascinating and frightening at the same time. Lancelot awoke in a sumptuous chamber with a soft bed and velvet curtains, but the beauty of the place could not shake the feeling of entrapment that oppressed him. He stood up, disoriented and confused, sensing that a spell was preventing him from using his strength to break out of the place. Just then, the door opened, and the 4 queens entered the room, their faces with enigmatic smiles.
Welcome to our castle, Sir Lancelot. We do hope you feel comfortable in your new home.
Where am I? What am I doing here? The Queen of North Gales, with a burning glance, replied,
You are here because we want you to be, Sir Lancelot. Each one of us has fallen in love with you and wants you as her lover.
Stunned by the words, Lancelot instinctively backed away. I am a knight of the Round Table pledged to King Arthur. I cannot reciprocate your feelings, for I have no more room in my heart for other women. Sir Gawain's mother interrupted him with an authoritative voice.
Do not be afraid, Sir Lancelot. We will not harm you. We only ask that you choose one of us to be your lover. You will have wealth, power, and all the love for which you could wish.
But Lancelot stood his ground. I appreciate your offers, noble queens, but my heart is with someone else. I cannot betray my vows and my heart. Thwarted by this refusal, the queens shot furious glances at Lancelot. Morgana felt her wrath grow at the knight's reluctance.
Very well, Sir Lancelot. If you cannot be swayed by love, perhaps you can be swayed by fear. You will be trapped in this castle until you comply with our wishes.
The knight was undeterred by the threat. I would rather die than betray my principles. Do as you wish with me, but I will never forsake my honor. And with that, Lancelot was held captive in the castle of the 4 queens, unwilling to give in to temptations and threats, not knowing how he could ever break the spell that tied him to that place. A long time had passed since Lancelot had been taken prisoner by the 4 queens. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and the knight was finding himself increasingly engulfed in a wave of loneliness and frustration. The freedom he once experienced was now a distant memory. He spent the hours roaming around his cell, trying to keep his body and mind occupied. He exercised with the rage of a caged lion, fought against imagined enemies, and relived past battles in his memories. But nothing would dispel the distress of imprisonment, the longing for Camelot, for the Knights of the Round Table, and above all for Guinevere. Despite his suffering and uncertainty, Lancelot stood firm in his decision. He would not give in to the queens. He would not double-cross his vows and his love for Guinevere. Freedom was of no value if it came at the cost of his honor. However, Morgana would not give up on her plans. Obsessed with Lancelot, she resorted to all her magical powers to win him over. She conjured up spells and incantations, trying to influence the knight's mind, to detect his weaknesses, his deepest desires. The sorceress intently observed his mind, searching his thoughts, dreams, memories, and then she spotted it. She noticed Guinevere's image shining brightly in Lancelot's heart, a deep and unshakable love, the source of his strength and endurance. Morgana maliciously smiled. She had finally found Lancelot's vulnerability. Now she knew how to turn it to her advantage. With a cunning plot in mind, she set about using Lancelot's love for Guinevere as a weapon, to tamper with him, to shatter him, to finally have hold of him. As Lancelot was withering away in prison, an unexpected force worked in his favor. Eloise, a young lady in waiting, secretly admired the knight. Moved by his story and outraged by the wrongdoing of his confinement, she decided to help him. Eloise was gifted with a shrewd intelligence and a brave heart. She had been working in the castle for years, moving discreetly through the corridors and understanding every corner of the fortress like the back of her hand. She watched Lancelot from a distance, in awe of his resilience and courage despite adversity. Eloise crept into Lancelot's cell, bearing a stolen key and a daring plan.
Sir Lancelot, I have come to free you.
Surprised by the young woman's appearance, Lancelot eyed her distrustfully.
My name is Eloise, and I can no longer stand by while a noble knight like you rots away in this prison. I have come to help you escape.
Touched by the young woman's courage and generosity, Lancelot felt a spark of hope rise in his chest. How? The queens are powerful, and this castle is guarded by spells and loyal servants.
Trust me, Sir Lancelot. Wear this cloak. It holds a fairy spell, and will help you hide in the shadows. I know the secret passageways and weaknesses of this fortress that not even Morgana could detect. Follow me, and I will lead you out of this place.
Thus, led by the valiant Eloise, Lancelot darted through the dark and labyrinthine corridors of the castle. They dodged sleeping guards, uncovered secret passages with Eloise, using her knowledge of the castle to protect them from danger. With every step, Lancelot was overwhelmed by the young maid's fearlessness and wit. She was not just a guide, but an unexpected ally, a guardian angel leading him through the darkness. For what felt like an eternity, they spotted a dim light at the end of the tunnel. As they emerged at the exit, Lancelot took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air of freedom inflate his lungs. Thank you, Eloise. I'm now free again. I will never forget your bravery and your kindness. How can I ever repay this tremendous favor?
And I will never forget the day I helped free the magnificent Sir Lancelot of the Lake. But I need you to help my father, King Bandus.
Bandus was a righteous and honorable king, but his power was endangered by enemies and rivals who lusted after his lands. Lancelot resolved that he would use his knightly skills to defend the king and secure the safety of Eloise and her people. A few days into his journey, Lancelot reached the kingdom of Bandus. He announced himself to the king, revealing his identity and connection with Eloise. Surprised and grateful for the renowned knight's presence, Bandamagus received him with honors and offered him hospitality. During the banquet in his honor, Lancelot became aware that the king was gearing up for a tournament where he would defend his title of nobility and his kingdom against ambitious opponents. Given the chance to fulfill his promise to Eloise, Lancelot offered to fight as the king's champion.
Sir Lancelot, your presence here is a gift from heaven. With your courage and skill, I'm sure we will win this tournament and ward off the enemies who threaten my kingdom.
True to his word, Lancelot got ready for the tournament. He knew that he was not only battling for Bandamagus, but also for Eloise. The day of the tournament, Lancelot stepped into the arena with the assurance of a true champion. His helmet shone under the sun, and his armor cast an invincible glow. When his name was announced, the hearts of the knights trembled, as they had already heard of Lancelot's reputation as an undefeated knight. He met each opponent with courage and skill, taking them down one by one. He kept calm and focused, using his experience and skill to outsmart each opponent. As Bandamagus's champion, Lancelot's victory in the tournament meant that the king kept his title and had his honor reinstated in the eyes of his suitors. The crowd burst into applause, and the overjoyed king embraced Lancelot in gratitude.
Sir Lancelot, you are a true hero! You have saved my kingdom and honored the memory of a noble knight. I will be forever grateful for your help.
With a pleased smile, Lancelot replied, I have merely fulfilled my duty, your majesty, and I have kept my promise to your daughter. Lancelot once again proved his nobility and loyalty, honoring his word and upholding justice, even in distant lands and on behalf of a young woman who risked it all to save him. After winning the tournament, Lancelot set off again, aimlessly riding through forests and plains, when he spotted an up-and-coming knight in the distance. As they rode past each other, the knight greeted him with a courteous gesture, but he was also carrying some unsettling news. Queen Guinevere had been kidnapped. The news hit Lancelot like a thunderbolt. Guinevere, the woman he loved in secrecy, was in danger. A rush of urgency overcame him, and Lancelot galloped as fast as he could towards Camelot. The quest to rescue the queen became his life's mission, and Lancelot, fueled by love and loyalty, was ready to face any danger to save the woman who dwelt in his heart. The trip back to Camelot was sheer torture for Lancelot. With every league he traveled, his anguish intensified, and the sight of Guinevere in danger tore at his insides. When Lancelot reached the Camelot gates, he was welcomed by Sir Gawain, who was waiting for him with a somber expression on his face.
Lancelot, thank God you have now returned. We need you.
Tell me everything, Gawain. How did the queen get kidnapped? Gawain ushered them inside the castle, where King Arthur was awaiting in his quarters. The mood was heavy, and the court was shocked and dismayed. The knight found out that the queen had been kidnapped by Sir Maleagant, an arrogant and disloyal knight. He was holding her prisoner in an unknown location and wanted to make her his wife. Lancelot was listening attentively, restraining the anger welling up in his throat. The king said that he had dispatched messengers to Sir Maleagant, demanding the queen's immediate release. Several knights were sent to track down the whereabouts of the villain and the queen. My king, I swear on my honor that I will by no means ever return to Camelot until I have saved Queen Guinevere from Sir Maleagant's hands. I will endure any danger, overcome any obstacle, and bring her back unharmed to this court, even if it costs my life. With his mission to rescue Guinevere in his mind, Lancelot got ready for the journey. His eyes, once heavy with anguish, now shone with determination. Sir Gawain, inspired by Lancelot's speech, also resolved to depart in search of the queen. Lancelot went along a narrow, dark path, where he came across a dwarf driving a cart. When he saw Lancelot getting closer, the dwarf asked him if he was looking for the queen. Lancelot said yes, and the dwarf, who detested the ostentation of knights, revealed a mischievous grin and challenged him to climb into the cart and be taken on a parade, so that he could reveal information about Guinevere's whereabouts. Being taken in the cart was a badge of dishonor in those days, and only criminals and prisoners were forced to travel in it. Aware of the humiliation this meant, Lancelot hesitated for a moment. But his love for Guinevere and his resolve to rescue her spoke louder. Lancelot brushed aside the embarrassment and climbed into the cart, following the dwarf in his search for the queen. From that moment on, his adventure took a new direction, punctuated by humility and sacrifice in the name of love. With an eerie smile, the dwarf led Lancelot through tortuous and hidden paths. The cart rattled and swayed, and the knight kept silent, resigned to the humiliation the circumstances imposed on him. After several hours of riding, they reached an imposing castle. Having fulfilled his part of the bargain, the dwarf led Lancelot to the castle gates, and the knight stepped down, feeling the weight of the prying and mocking eyes watching him. The dwarf told him that he would find clues to the queen's whereabouts there. Upon entering the castle, an elegant lady warmly welcomed Lancelot, but the presence of the chariot rider did not go unnoticed, and Lancelot endured the whispers and looks of contempt from the other noblemen present. Even so, he held his head high. But Lancelot was battling an internal conflict. The embarrassment of having traveled in the wagon tormented him, but his love for Guinevere drove him forward. He questioned whether he was being a true knight if he was honoring the chivalric principles by submitting to such humiliation. But deep in his heart, he knew that his fondness for Guinevere was stronger than any moral code, and that he was willing to pay any price to rescue her. At nightfall, Lancelot was guided to a richly furnished room, where a lavish bed awaited him. Drained by the journey and the challenges he had faced, the knight lay down to rest, but sleep did not bring him the peace for which he had hoped. He dreamt that a funeral procession was drawing near, and in the center of it, a familiar figure was being carried, draped in a veil. As he drew closer, Lancelot horrifically identified the pale, motionless silhouette of Guinevere. The sight of his seemingly lifeless sweetheart shook him to the core, and for a moment, hopelessness seemed to overwhelm him. But Lancelot soon noticed that something was amiss. The procession did not exude sadness, and the faces of those who were with it did not reveal any mourning. On closer inspection, he noticed that Guinevere, although pale, was still faintly breathing. Hope was alive. As midnight approached, a flaming spear broke through the window, setting fire to the bed and the room. With sharp reflexes, Lancelot leapt from the burning bed, and with the help of a rug, managed to suffocate the flames and prevent the fire from spreading. The bed test, as it was known, was meant to prove the courage and endurance of those staying there. Again, Lancelot displayed his bravery and decisiveness, coming out of the ordeal without a hitch. Having survived the challenges in the castle and Guinevere's distressing vision, Lancelot received information about the path he had to follow. The next stage of his journey would lead him to the Sword Bridge, a dangerous passageway that protected the kingdom of Gore, Maleagant's domain. As its name implied, the bridge was made of a single, razor-sharp blade that cut through anyone who dared to cross it. Knowing the peril ahead of him, Lancelot showed no hesitation. He mounted up with courage and determination and set off towards the bridge. Upon arriving, he was greeted by a frightening sight. The blade glinted coldly in the sunlight, and the abyss that gaped beneath it seemed to swallow up the light. But the knight was not deterred. He took a deep breath and, with steady, confident steps, began to cross the bridge. Every footstep, the blade cut into his flesh, painfully wounding him. Blood ran down his feet, smearing the bridge with a red trail. The knight got off balance and almost fell, but he managed to hold on and pressed on, even though his hands were hurt. But Lancelot did not utter a single groan. His eyes were locked on the objective and his mind focused on Guinevere. Pain was merely an obstacle to be overcome. a price to be paid for his sweetheart's freedom. Lancelot reached the other side of the bridge in what seemed like an eternity. He was hurt and exhausted, but triumphant. The sword bridge, an apparently impenetrable barrier, had been overcome by the power of love. As Lancelot faced dangers and trials in his quest, Guinevere found herself imprisoned in a cold, damp dungeon in Maleagant's castle. The once glowing and soaring queen now found herself locked in a dark and despairing place. Angst and uncertainty consumed her, and the memory of Camelot, Arthur, and Lancelot stirred in her a twinge of longing and melancholy. In his obsession with Guinevere, Maleagant visited her every day, attempting to convince her to accept his love and become his wife. But the queen, loyal to her king and her heart, refused the villain's pleas, standing firm in her resistance. However, Maleagant did not give up his plans, and every day he put more pressure on Guinevere, threatening her with violence and punishment if she did not give in to his wishes. She trusted that Lancelot would come to rescue her, that the knight would endure any danger to save her from the tyrant's hands. This belief provided her with the strength to resist, to hold on to her dignity and hope during adversity. Lancelot, meanwhile, having overcome the sword bridge and nearing Maleagant's castle, was bracing himself for the final clash. Having crossed the sword bridge, Lancelot stepped into the kingdom of Gore, a land beset by a dark and overwhelming atmosphere. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the wind howling between the rocks and the crackling of solitary crows. Lancelot suddenly felt the weight of the atmosphere on his shoulders, as if the air itself was permeated with an evil energy. Then, Lancelot spotted an incoming knight in the distance. He was dressed in imposing armor and a feathered helmet, and his shield sported a coat of arms he could not recognize. Hoping to obtain information about Guinevere's whereabouts, Lancelot sped up to meet the knight. As they got closer, the knight greeted Lancelot with a friendly voice and a polite smile. For his part, Lancelot asked about Queen Guinevere's whereabouts, and the knight was extremely happy to help him. He stated that he knew where the queen was being held, and offered to take him there. Relying on the knight's noble appearance and gentle words, Lancelot accepted his offer and followed him down a path off the main road. They came to an imposing castle with high walls and menacing towers. As soon as Lancelot crossed the castle gates, the knight revealed his true intentions. With an evil smirk, he ordered Lancelot to put his hands up, as he had been captured and was now his prisoner. The castle doors slammed shut behind Lancelot, and he found himself encircled by enemies, trapped in an unknown place. He was yet thrown again into a dark, damp dungeon, with stone walls and iron bars. The door shut with a menacing bang, and the knight was enveloped in darkness and silence. The shame of being duped was compounded by the frustration of having been pulled away from his quest for Guinevere. He carefully surveyed his surroundings, looking for a loophole, a weakness in the prison structure. He found that the iron bars blocking the window were rusty and fragile. He managed, with an extraordinary effort, to tear them away from the wall, opening a passage to the outside. Using the night darkness to his advantage, Lancelot started to move stealthily in search of his armor and sword. He was as gentle as a big cat, his steps silent and his movements accurate, while avoiding the creaking of the floorboards. Then a voice suddenly called Lancelot's name. Although it was only a low whisper, the feminine sound was unique to the knight. It was the voice of the woman who dwelt in his heart. Guinevere stood in the small cell lit only by a shimmering candle. When she spotted Lancelot, the queen's face flashed with lightning, and a trembling smile appeared on her lips. With his heart beating fast in his chest, Lancelot grabbed Guinevere's hand and felt that the first stage of his mission had been achieved. But now he had to find a way to free her. Guinevere told the knight that she was certain he would show up to save her. Lancelot succeeded in surprising and defeating the watchman guarding the armory, He managed to recover his sword and armor, and looked set to face Sir Maleagant and bring the weight of the blade of justice down on him. However, as expected, Maleagant was not honorable enough to take on Lancelot in a duel. He ordered his guards to clear the entire world of Lancelot's presence. But this time, Lancelot was ready for combat and would face any adversary standing in his way, knowing that fate works in favor of the righteous. The experienced knight prevented his enemies from surrounding him entirely, preventing him from being struck in the back. Like this, Lancelot defeated one henchman at a time until there was no enemy left between him and the dishonored knight who had kidnapped his queen. Lancelot fought Maleagant with a lust for revenge, attacking with lion-like savagery. His blows, powerful and relentless. Each strike, each defense, bore the force of his outrage at Maleagant's betrayal, the humiliation he had suffered in the chariot, and the suffering inflicted on Guinevere. His opponent teased him further by saying that he could sense in his eyes that such anger came from more than just a sense of duty and justice, that he could clearly see that the knight was desperately in love with his queen. But he had no need to worry, since after the death of the Camelot knight, he would honor him for his courage by naming the son he would have with Guinevere Lancelot. The very sight of Guinevere next to that monster unleashed an unbridled fury in Lancelot's heart. The knight delivered such a brutal blow that he broke his enemy's sword and ended his life. His revenge was now complete, and the cost of having sullied his reputation had been worth it, for the queen was safe. Once her freedom had been secured, the tearful queen threw herself into Lancelot's arms and hugged him tightly. Lancelot embraced her gently, feeling her body shudder in his arms. The feeling of having her there, unharmed, brought unparalleled joy to his heart. In that moment of reunion, the grief and trials of the journey melted away. The knight declared that he would brave any danger or enemy to protect his queen. With its perils and conflicts, the outside world vanished, leaving only Lancelot and Guinevere, bound in a loving and grateful embrace. Lancelot and Guinevere rode off on the same horse towards Camelot. On the way, the knight and the queen recounted the challenges they had encountered that day. That was when Lancelot spoke of his moment of doubt, when he was forced to defile his honor and reputation by climbing into the convict's chariot. Astonished by his confession, Guinevere looked at him with outrage, asking if he had dared, for even an instant, to follow her and rescue her. Lancelot attempted to justify himself, mentioning the code of honor of a knight, but was cut short by Guinevere, who asked him where her honor was as a queen when she found herself on her own and at the mercy of the villain. Perceiving the wrongness of his words, Lancelot became defensive, and the two argued intensely. At the peak of the quarrel, the passion they both felt finally found the break it had been waiting for and escaped the scrutiny of reason. The couple kissed passionately, a whirlwind of restrained emotions finally unleashed. In their moment of prohibited love, Lancelot and Guinevere merged into a single being, forgetting the outside world. Love was shattering its barriers, passion was overcoming reason. Following the passionate kiss, an emotionally charged hush fell between Lancelot and Guinevere. While still embracing, Guinevere, caressing Lancelot's face, sorrowfully whispered that it was a wonderful but fleeting moment. It was a forbidden love, a flame burning in secrecy, never to be shown in the daylight. With his heart aching, Lancelot nodded in agreement, saying that fate had brought them together in an impossible situation. She was his king's wife, the queen he had vowed to protect and serve, and he the knight who was meant to be the most loyal of all at the round table. Lancelot took Guinevere's hand, kissed it softly, and said, "Even if our love is never truly fulfilled, my queen, I will treasure this moment in my heart forever. The memory of your love will strengthen me to face any challenge, to overcome any obstacle." With tearful eyes, Guinevere nestled into his arms. The loving couple accepted the real nature of their fate, the impossibility of a future together, but passion raged in their hearts, a shared secret that would unite them forever, even if from a distance, even if in secret. A forbidden love, like a flower born among the stones, now finding a way to bloom in the shadows, sustained by the memory of that moment when it was allowed to burst into life. The Camelot gates were open to welcome Lancelot and Guinevere as heroes. The court jubilantly greeted the knight who had once again proved his bravery and loyalty to the kingdom. With a glowing smile, Arthur wrapped his arms around Lancelot and lavished him with praise. A banquet was held in Lancelot's honor, and the main hall of the castle was awash with music, laughter, and celebrations. The knights of the Round Table raised a toast to the hero, while the ladies stared adoringly at him. In the spotlight, Lancelot accepted the honors with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The glory and recognition pleased him, but a lingering shadow of guilt and disquiet persisted in his heart. Lancelot felt divided. On one side, the joy of having saved Guinevere and the joy of fulfilling his duty made him feel proud. On the other, the memory of the kiss of his forbidden love for the queen tormented him with the awareness of his betrayal. He knew that his love for Guinevere was a menace to his allegiance to Arthur, a force that could destroy everything he had built. After the festivities, Lancelot withdrew into his thoughts, pondering the future and the consequences of his actions. He questioned whether he could resist temptation, and if he could keep his love for Guinevere concealed. He was plagued by uncertainty and inner conflict that endangered his peace and poise. Faced with his turmoil, Lancelot turned to diplomacy as an opportunity to escape. When King Arthur told him he needed an envoy to visit King Perilous of Corbin, he volunteered to take on the mission. A distant and mysterious kingdom, Corbin seemed the perfect retreat for a bewildered heart and a spirit in search of peace. He was looking, above all, to find distance from Guinevere. The king's proximity, the glances, the memories of the forbidden kiss, all this tormented him, reawakening the flame of passion and putting him in constant internal conflict. To preserve his honor and the stability of the kingdom, Lancelot needed to avoid the temptation that Guinevere posed. On arriving in Corbin, Lancelot encountered a kingdom draped in mystery and spirituality. The old serene-looking King Perilous exuded an aura of wisdom and mystical power. His court was like nothing Lancelot had ever seen, with sages, seers, and monks freely wandering around the castle, and conversations about prophecies and sacred fates echoing through the corridors. Perilous was a guardian of ancient secrets, a man bent on fulfilling a sacred prophecy that would dictate the fate of his kingdom and the whole of Christendom. This prophecy heralded the arrival of a chosen knight, the only one able to reach the Holy Grail, the sacred chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper. According to the prophecy, this knight would be Lancelot's son. Aware of Lancelot's identity and importance, Perilous welcomed him with great honor and hospitality. However, behind this kindness and warmth, the king was hatching a deceitful plan. He intended to pair Lancelot with his daughter Elaine to ensure that the prophecy would be carried out and that the Holy Knight would come into the world. Unaware of Perilous' intentions, Lancelot was drawn into Corbin's mystical atmosphere. He was lured by the king's wisdom, the stories about the Grail, and the promise of a greater destiny. Nevertheless, his heart still belonged to Guinevere, and the memories of the queen prevented him from fully indulging in this new reality. King Perilous' daughter Elaine was a young and uniquely beautiful woman, with long golden hair and eyes as blue as the spring skies. Her gentle features and serene expression concealed a dreamy nature and a heart brimming with romantic longings. Raised in an environment steeped in mysticism and prophecy, Elaine nurtured a strong belief in fate and in the higher purposes that guided human life. Elaine was instantly attracted to him. The knight's reputation preceded him, and the tales of his heroic deeds and unshakable loyalty to Queen Guinevere had piqued her curiosity and admiration. On meeting him in person, Elaine was even more entranced. His manly beauty, His noble demeanor and his detached stare utterly captivated her, awakening in her a love at first sight. Elaine surrendered to her father's plans, ready to do anything to win Lancelot's love and fulfill the prophecy that would alter the fate of Corbin and Arthur's entire kingdom. King Perilous hatched a plan to bring the prophecy to fruition. With Elaine's help, he poured Lancelot a spellbinding drink, a magical elixir that would alter his senses and fog his mind. Exhausted by the journey and the inner turmoil that plagued him, Lancelot took the drink offered by Perilous and Elaine. He never suspected the intentions of the king and his daughter and considered the drink a gesture of hospitality and kindness. Yet as he drank the bewitched liquid, his senses took a turn for the worse and confusion seized his mind. Under the potion's influence, Lancelot noticed Elaine bearing Guinevere's features. Her eyes, her hair, her sweet smile. Everything about her looked familiar, as if the queen were right there in front of him in Corbin. His heart was overwhelmed with both confusion and lust, and he approached Elaine, gripped by an unbridled passion. When Elaine noticed the effect of the potion on Lancelot, she gave herself over with a mixture of joy and guilt. She knew that Lancelot was not seeing her as she really was, but the illusion let her indulge in a romantic dream, however short-lived and deceitful. Under the veil of magic and illusion, Lancelot and Elaine bonded in a passion-filled night. Believing he was with Guinevere, Lancelot surrendered himself to love with devotion and intensity. In turn, Elaine reciprocated his passion. When dawn burst the spell, the illusion crumbled with it. Lancelot awoke in an unknown bed, his heart filled with a foreign sensation of emptiness and guilt. Elaine slept serenely beside him, her golden hair scattered across the pillow. But, to Lancelot's horror, Guinevere was no longer to be seen in her features. The magic potion had worn off, and reality was crashing in with the clap of thunder. His mind was swept by a deluge of muddled and disturbing memories. Shards of the night before, images of Elaine mingling with Guinevere, the passionate kiss, the surrender to love. It all now felt like a nightmare, a betrayal of his beloved queen. Shame and remorse ate away at him, and he felt impure, tarnished by the unconscious betrayal he had perpetrated. Lancelot dressed hastily, his mind still in turmoil. He needed to escape from the place that had brought him so much shame. He fled the castle as an outlaw, a traitor, a disgraced knight who had once again broken his vows of loyalty and fidelity. Guinevere's image haunted him, and he wondered if it had all been a trick by King Perilous. The outcome could have been even worse. If Elaine had really been Guinevere, he had committed an act of high treason against his king. He realized that he could no longer restrain the passion he felt for the queen. 9 months after the fateful night in Corbin, Elaine gave birth to a baby boy named Galahad, Lancelot's baptismal name before he moved to Avalon with the fairies. From the moment he was born, the child bore a holy and pure aura, and the wise men of the Perilous court noticed in him the hallmarks of the prophesied knight, the one bound to attain the Holy Grail. His birth sparked extraordinary joy in Corbin. King Perilous felt that his grandson was the fulfillment of his plans and the certainty that the prophecy would be met. Despite her sadness and regret at the way she had conceived the boy, Elaine loved Galahad with all her heart and devoted herself to bringing him up with love and devotion. He became a boy of noble and pure character, gifted with an unwavering faith and a profound sense of justice. His goal was clear: to follow in his father Lancelot's footsteps and become a knight of the Round Table, but with an even greater mission: the quest for the Holy Grail that would redeem the world.